Hey Josh, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Full disclosure, guys, we started recording like 5 minutes ago, and I forgot to hit the record button, so we're kind of redoing it. But
Thanks for having me, David.
yeah,
Appreciate it.
yeah. So, Josh, just like you did before, can you just give a brief background info on who you are, what you do?
Yeah, I'm gonna add a little more on than what we did before. So I was born in Korea, came here when I was two,
Mhm,
grew up in Texas, and then I think basically most of my life has been in Georgia now, Gwinnett County,
mhm,
growing up in the watching the Korean community grow here, as a matter of fact. And I was born a pastor's kid, and
mhm.
so there's a lot of excitement there too, a
Yeah.
lot of yeah, a lot of PTSD from that as well. I'm sure a lot of our viewers can probably relate to that.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, right now I'm working for Cricket Wireless as a office admin, as an
Mhm.
executive assistant, and it's been about 4 years doing that. 10 years in volunteering, serving at my dad's church as a
Mhm.
youth teacher and
Mhm.
youth director at times. So
Mhm.
yeah, I have a real passion for the youth.
Yeah, and you have an actual calling to make it your vocation, right? Because you're gonna be
Yeah,
you're starting seminary
I
soon.
am. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
actually,
exciting.
starting with one class. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
graduate
that's
work's gonna
awesome.
be pretty tough, right? I mean, I don't know what to expect. Yeah,
Yeah, but it's funny you mentioned something about seeing the Korean community grow here in Atlanta. So
yeah.
I moved from LA. Our family moved from LA in 2000, right around 2000,
Oh
and
yeah, me too. Yeah.
so yeah. So even for me, I can like see and remember how small the Asian community was
Oh
back
yeah.
then and
Yeah.
to how big it is now. Do you have that kind of same recollection?
There was like one or two little Korean markets,
Yeah.
and there was no like Paris baguette or like Mozart, that's a luxury that
Right.
yeah, like it didn't come until much later for sure.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
remember in the maybe like the Pleasant Hill area, there was like a
oh yeah,
little bit of a presence, but that was it. And like Buford Highway, there was some Korean
like
things
one
here and
block.
there. Right.
Yeah.
But now, off the top of my head, within driving distance from where I am now, there's at least five or six Korean grocery stores, like big
Oh
ones, right? And
yeah.
countless cafes I could go to. So it's like
Yeah.
the population here definitely did blow up.
Yeah, it's pretty
And
insane. Yeah.
yeah, and just a added context to who Josh is. It's kind of funny because we talked about this right before. But Josh is actually Suji's boyfriend. Suji, who has been on this podcast as well. But the funny connection that these two have that I just found is before Josh, Suji was the only other guest I've had who asked about where she should be looking, the camera or the screen. But it's so funny that Josh asked the same question right before we started recording. So
I guess it was meant to
that's
be.
kind of
Yeah.
it's kind of cute. It's cute. But yeah, so Josh, the reason why I wanted to have you on today, the main focus is well, obviously we want to get your story, but also I was very intrigued by your YouTube channel. So being that Josh is Suji's boyfriend, and Suji and my wife being very close friends, the four of us got together not that long ago, maybe a month or two ago, to have
I think it
dinner.
was about, yeah, last month. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, we were talking, we were hanging out, and yeah, Josh told us about his YouTube channel, and I was immediately hooked. I started watching, and it's really good content. And Josh, you want to reveal what your YouTube channel is about?
Yeah, it's gonna be a very rare topic, right? Not people don't really talk about it. It's
Hmm.
Korean Christian history.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's very fascinating, and I guess we'll unpack that slowly.
Yeah, and the contrast is going to be very interesting because we think about the church from an American context a lot because people who live in America, we go to American churches, or even if it's a Korean American church, there's still the history of the American church behind it. But when you think about the history of the Korean church in Korea, it's first of all, it's not super old, and it's a clear day and night transformation from a
Oh yeah,
nation that was completely not Christian to a nation where like missionaries started going, and like you see the blossoming of the Korean church, and it's fascinating because being a Korean myself, I never thought to learn about it. All I
Yeah.
knew is I knew a few statistics about how big the Korean church is. Like I remember hearing a few years back that Korea is second to the US in terms of the number of missionaries that they send in the world. So
And that's
they're,
pretty crazy too,
yeah,
considering, yeah, population contrast. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
So I do know that right now Korea does have a big, faith, you know, presence there. But there was a time, if you look at like watch Korean dramas of like olden days, there was a
oh,
time where like there's literally no Christians, right?
yeah, it's like North Korea almost, right
Right.
now. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know why I never thought to look it up. I guess it was just intriguing. It actually I never thought to look it up until we talked. Like when
Oh.
when you mentioned, oh, my YouTube channel is about the origins of the Korean church. I was like, oh, I guess there is an origin because the origin of the American church is way more blurred, right? Because it
Mm,
was the nation started as a migration of Protestants from Europe
mhm.
to
Escaping persecution. Yeah.
right, to America. So you can't say that the origin happened at the beginning of the nation because there was some carryover from, the people's faiths and Protestants in Europe. But there is like I said, a night and day transformative contrast for Korea's church history. So yeah, can we talk a little bit about it? Because I don't want to give away the story. I don't want to talk about all of it because I'm still going through your videos and I
Okay.
want to
Yeah.
continue to do so. But I also want our viewers, our listeners to go watch your videos as well. So yeah. Well, actually, before we even talk about that, can we talk about why you started doing this channel? Like how you even got into, Korean church
Yeah.
history?
And I think this is this is the part where we realized
Yeah, that I
we were
wasn't
recording. So,
recording. Yeah. So now it's gonna
um,
be actual conversation start. Yeah.
yeah, so we caught up. Yeah, my dad being a pastor, he and also like a big history buff, he always told me about these stories. He's a really good storyteller. So he would tell me these stories and with a topic like Korean history, Korean church history, keeping like a 8-year-old's attention for that long, that's amazing.
Hmm.
But he would always tell me stories about it and and those things, because I was so young, they just kind of passed through my head a little bit. I forgot about them. And then I came to this dilemma. I thought surely Korean church wasn't just, elders fighting church splits, and there had to be more than that. And so I thought
Mm.
I got curious. A little bit of it like started with, oh, what happened after Revelations, after the New Testament, and kind of tracing as far as I can through that. And that kind of led into so like church history in general, and then I decided I would kind of research Korean church history as well to see, um, because and I also have to thank another mentor that I have named Pastor Billy, who's actually church planted somewhere in Suwannee,
Oh.
um, yeah, called Grace Community. He led like a conference, like a seminar, and that kind of reawakened me to like Korean church history. That was back in like first year of college. And
Mm.
so a little bit of my dad's influence and then some of Pastor Billy's influence as well. And that kind of um, just, blossomed into research. And
Mm.
it's amazing. It really is.
Wait, so
Yeah.
you traced the church after like Revelations. So are you talking
Yeah.
about like
Yeah.
the ancient like first church? You kind of traced what happened after that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And like,
cool.
this is kind of going off on a tangent, but like
Uh-huh.
there are certain names in, Paul's epistles,
Hmm.
like Clement, for example, and like it's so fascinating when you can actually trace those people in history.
Hmm.
So they weren't just people in the Bible, and you gotta
Right.
wonder, like, God didn't just go radio silent after, the
Right.
Bible. And so, yeah, like that was like a real fascination.
Hmm.
And then that kind of traced all the way to Korean church history.
Okay, cool. So I want to ask you how, so obviously your dad gave you a lot of information, but I can't imagine 100% of your information coming from him. So like, do you just kind of like, did you just kind of Google through, the rest of it? Or like, did you find a book about Korean church
Yeah.
history? Or like, how did you go about doing that?
They have a series, like basically it's like a biography and like biographies of Korean Christian leaders.
Mhm.
I think it's from like a series called IHTHT.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't know if this is okay. Let me see if I have one. Actually, yeah, but it's like a collection of like sermons
Uh-huh.
for like, several different pastors in the
Mhm.
past. And it kind of started from there. I started collecting those books from Amazon,
Mhm.
looking up like Korean content on YouTube.
Mhm.
They have like cartoonized, kind of cringy versions, but they get the story across. So
Uh-huh.
it's like, yeah, looking at those and then ordering a lot of other books.
Mhm.
So a lot of books, yeah, books and YouTube content.
Gotcha. So you're just kind of getting information from a lot of different sources and curating it basically for your channel.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So let's talk about the channel. So the name I really like. It's 기억하자, right?
yeah.
So, but then instead of 기억, you're using the actual like 기억,
The letter
the
Kyoga.
letter,
Yeah.
yeah. And
I'm glad you
so
like it.
yeah,
It's kind
it's
of cheesy,
clever.
but
It's very
yeah.
clever. But for people who aren't Korean, what does 기억하자 mean?
Ryokaja means to remember.
Mm. So
And that was kind of yeah.
So is the motivation for your channel to kind of preserve our history and so that we kind of don't forget, or what is the motivation behind it?
Yeah, that's the main thing I would
Mhm.
say to bring awareness because, like you said, and like I experienced as well, like we don't really talk about it. Not even Korean textbooks don't talk about it. Korean churches don't talk about it. Eventually, it's just gonna vanish
Mhm.
unless we keep it alive. So that's one. And then two is like you can see the past, you can see the future when you look into the past.
Mm,
Because like Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, nothing's ever really new under the sun.
right.
So we're going to see the same trends, and so yeah, just to remember those people and be inspired by them.
Yeah. Yeah, and the I want to talk about because I was shocked kind of hearing I think your first it might be your second video
Yeah,
hearing the story of kind of the Korea's first I guess encounter with like Christian a Christian person.
yeah,
And it wasn't kind of like the storybook, oh, missionary came and the people were curious and they brought him in and then they had a good conversation. It wasn't like that at all.
yeah.
And
No Thanksgiving dinner, right? Yeah,
right, right. So can you talk about, I believe the missionary's name was Robert, is it Robert Thomas? Am I getting
yeah,
that
yeah.
right?
You're right,
Yeah.
Robert Thomas.
So again, I don't want you to recap your entire channel here, but just to get
Yeah.
the people hooked. And because this story really like shook me, can
Oh
you
yeah,
kind of
this is a
explain
big one.
the story of Robert Thomas a little bit for us?
Yeah. So Robert Thomas, to give like a real, just basic breakdown, he was a pastor from Wales, which is Great Britain. He and his wife, who was pregnant, they decided to be missionaries to China. As soon as he got ordained as a pastor, and um, it's just like he had so much promise, but he decided to just almost throw all that away to go to China but things didn't work out. And after a couple of months, his wife and unborn child they died. So he was traumatized. He put down his missionary duties and then was working as like a translator for the Chinese government in an area of China that's really close to Korea. And so he came across some Korean people, knowing they were kind of different, speaking a different language. He talked to them, basically found out. Oh, and to add on to that, like Korea was not known at the time.
Mhm.
Only like China and the nearby countries would know about it. So European countries would not know about Korea at the time. So he basically discovered this unknown kingdom and realized that there were thousands and thousands of people there who hadn't heard the gospel. And this kind of reignited his passion for missions, which had been kind of snuffed out with all the tragedy that he had just gone through. He's 26 years old at the time. Just didn't have a family. He was widowed. So that was yeah, meeting those people kind of reignited the flames for him, and he took two trips there. I'm gonna like skip over really quickly.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
a long story short, he took a bunch of Chinese Bibles that were translated into Chinese. Was planning to like even though it was illegal in Korea at the time to have any kind of Western influence or literature, he was basically risking his life to spread the gospel, spread those Bibles there, and he ended up dying.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so a lot of interesting facts that I'm so tempted to tell right now, but we'll just
Yeah.
keep it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah.
And I think the for the for people to understand the context of what a voyage from America or from Wales to
Oh
China
yeah.
was, this was like
Yeah.
in 1800s, so
Yeah. Steamboats.
it's
Yeah.
steamboats, and it wasn't, yeah, like you said in your video, it wasn't like a luxury cruise.
No,
It
no.
took months to get there, right?
Yeah. Like five
Yeah.
months.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so I mean, even that alone for me, just I can't even imagine. If I mean, my wife is pregnant right now.
Oh yeah.
She's
Yeah.
gonna be we're actually expecting in like a month or so. But
Yeah.
if I
It's really
told
close.
yeah, if I told her, hey, we're gonna take a boat ride somewhere, even if that boat ride were only a week, she would say, "Are you out of your mind? Like, why why would we do this?" Right?
Yeah.
But the fact that Robert Thomas, he had that conviction, that calling, that first of all, that was really shocking to me. Like you were saying, he was a very gifted linguist and he had a lot of promise. So it was almost like as if, someone in our community, like they got perfect score on their like MCATs or something, had really good
Yeah.
grades. They were
Yeah.
they could have gone to like medical school, but then they decided, hey, instead of this, I'm gonna go to a different a country and then serve people there. Like it would be kind of akin to that, right?
Yeah. Basically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's another shocking thing for me, but also not only the fact that he died, but the way that he died, right? So he was like shouting like believe in Jesus, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, was he saying that in Korean? Was he shouting that in
He
Korean, or was that
was.
man?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was such a gifted linguist that he had already,
Mhm.
caught on to the Korean language.
And he was
Um.
like throwing as so I guess spoiler alert. I don't know if we need a spoiler alert for something that happened hundreds of years ago, but as the boat he was on was basically being sunk by the Koreans that were seeing him coming, like he was like throwing Bibles at them and like shouting at them like believe in Jesus. And
Mhm.
I can only imagine if I were there how that would affect me as a Korean, because
Oh
it's
yeah.
not only is this white person speaking my language, but he's shouting about something that's not regarding his survival, right? Like
Oh,
I would,
yeah.
if I would be like, why isn't he shouting about, hey, save me, or like, hey, like please don't kill
Yeah.
me?
Like surrendering. Yeah.
Yeah, he's shouting about something else, and that would really catch my attention. Like, what can be more important than
In his
his
life.
survival? And
Yeah.
the fact that that is kind of the seed to our like faith heritage is really something. Like I feel many different emotions about it. Like I don't know, that maybe there's a little bit of shame just because it's like, oh, like why couldn't my ancestors, right, have like accepted him? Like he had such a
Oh
desire to
yeah.
share a good message. But
Yeah.
like I kind of understand because it was, yeah, Western influence was outlawed. Like I believe Korea was called the Hermit Kingdom at the time. Um
Yeah. Because they saw China and how it opened up to all these European powers, and they were just cut into pieces basically.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so they didn't want that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember, man, this takes me way back, but I was in LA. When I lived in LA, my mom took me to this like music, I don't want to call it a music, it was like a play.
Okay.
And it was the only, I forget the entire story. I was like, I don't know, maybe second grade. But the scene that I remember is the Korean, it was like a Korean drama, right? The
Oh,
Korean
okay.
king saying, no, I will not accept the help of these nations. And the
Okay.
queen saying, like, oh, like, but like we're getting attacked by like China, like we are for our survival. Like, so I do know there was like a period of time in Korean history where like Korea was really struggling with, do we accept the help of these Westerners, or
Yeah.
do we try to like defend our nation by ourselves? Because Korea was constantly being invaded by Japan and
Mm.
China.
Yeah.
So with all of that going on, I can kind of understand why
Mm.
they were skeptical of this guy. But yeah, but man, that one story alone, it really opened my brain in terms of, wow, like wanting to like explore more and really own the heritage that like I have as a Korean. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just thankful that like you, you really did like retain a lot of the stuff that I said, and I'm
Yeah.
really glad because that's kind of what I want,
Uh-huh.
And so
No, I mean,
yeah.
and but the thing is, that's not like it gets more interesting as the story goes.
Oh
Like
yeah.
the whole like motel and the wallpapering, like
Yeah.
that is another crazy thing. Like you when I was listening to it, I was like, well, of course that happened. Like of course God orchestrated it that way. You know, like
Yeah.
it couldn't have been accidental. Like the way that God kind of put all the places, like people in their places and kind of orchestrated all of that. It's like really crazy, but it's not surprising.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What has the reception been of the channel for like the people who've been watching?
Well, just like any other startup, really, I think it's like they say that the community really is like the startup really needs the community's help. So
Hmm.
most of the reaction has been from like people that I know.
Hmm.
Some of them do look at the content. Others were just kind of like telling me, giving their feedback about, oh, it's kind of boring, it's kind of long. And
Hmm.
so the ones after that you're gonna see are kind of different, much
Hmm.
shorter, and has music in the background. And I try to like experiment with things here and there, but
Yeah.
everyone has said like they like the storytelling element of it,
Yeah.
um, and that it's been very inspirational.
Yeah, I mean, if I were
Yeah.
to give some feedback, I actually like so there are some things that you add in where you're like
Mm.
you say something and you're like, oh wait, that doesn't make sense, and then you kind of like
Oh yeah,
yeah, like
correct
you
myself. Yeah.
yeah, so like the fact that you like added like kept those in, I like it. I feel like it adds character and like
Oh
there's
okay.
yeah
Yeah.
yeah I don't think it was boring or too long. I thought I want to say. I'm like 5 or 6 videos in, and I haven't felt bored or
Oh
at
snap.
all.
Wow.
So yeah,
Yeah. You're almost done because I took a long break after like 9 or 8.
yeah.
Yeah. So you're almost there.
Okay. So then, like, I wanted to ask you, like, what
Uh,
can the community do to help you, to kind of keep you going and keep you encouraged?
well, I think I haven't really thought about that. There was a point where it really did matter what the numbers were, how many views there were. I was just, on the edge of my seat looking at my YouTube dashboard,
Mm-hmm.
trying
Hmm.
to see, but it's more so like they don't have to leave a like or anything. It's really people that watch it. I really hope that people watch it, people gain an understanding. I feel like Koreans are almost ashamed of Korean churches
Huh.
because we're always fighting, and it just it's nothing to really be proud of for a lot of people
Mm.
because of all the messiness that we've seen growing up. And I want them to know that it wasn't always like that, and
Mm.
that our generation can be the change. So if my videos, can somehow spur that, somehow bring that message across that, yeah, maybe the previous generations did kind of make mistakes there because we're all sinners,
Yeah.
but that we can make a difference, that's
Mm.
what I really want, Well, what kind of church are we going to leave behind for fourth and fifth generations, third, fourth,
Mm.
fifth generations? So that's really what I want from the community is for them to watch this, be inspired, even if it's just 1 or 2 videos, and to really see that the Korean church is something, it's a gift. It's not
Mm.
something that we should be ashamed of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good. So, I mean, have you struggled with that in terms of feeling
Oh yeah,
shame? Yeah.
yeah. Because
Because, go
yeah,
ahead, go ahead.
my dad being a pastor, church plants,
Mm,
yeah, there was a lot of messiness that I saw. I think at one point I thought, once I'm independent, I'm gonna just leave church altogether.
mm,
Yeah, that's how bad it was for a time. But yeah, so it was more than shame. It was more like resentment too.
mm,
But slowly God, I think knowing about Korean church history and knowing that that history can repeat, that good, glorious history can repeat, I
mm.
think that was a hope for me. And so
Wow.
that's kind of what brought me back. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. Because, yeah,
Uh,
I think pretty much if you ask any Korean American about their experience with church,
oh yeah.
they probably have 1 or 2 stories about, something negative that they faced. I mean,
Yeah.
I attended a church for a long time that had a lot of infighting, like a lot of just like police got involved at one point. It was really bad.
Oh wow.
It was one of
Police.
those, yeah, like
Mm,
just really, really bad situations. And,
yeah.
when this was when I was in youth group, right? So like
Ah,
at a younger age, kind of seeing this like happen, it
yeah.
almost makes you think, oh, this is how adults must do church, You know, like
Oh
you know what I
yeah.
mean? Like there is
Oh
that
no, that's not good.
right. There
Yeah.
is that element of, I mean, because you do as you see, right?
Mm.
Especially with people that you look up to. So I don't think I thought this actively, but kind of at a subconscious level, I think there was kind of a, and I think I still kind of like have this thought of that's kind of just how like us Koreans we do church. And but to hear that like there is this really amazing, glorious, God ordained like history that we have at near to the origination of our faith, of our Korean like faith. It's yeah, I think that gives me hope as well. That's really good to hear.
And I
But
think Korean Americans have even more
mm,
potential.
mm,
Just because, we all know that Koreans are very passionate people. We don't
mm.
close for any holiday, really.
Yeah.
We're always working, workaholic. But then we also have the influences from American culture,
Mhm,
like Western culture, so to speak.
mhm,
And I think that blend is going to be great,
mhm. Yeah.
as long as we're, yeah. Yeah.
And just to get a little theological here, I want to get your take on this because we talk about so one of the things, one kind of humorous but sad things that people used to say is, American churches, they grow by doing church plants. Korean churches grow by fighting and splitting. Like that's
Oh,
that's kind of one
oh,
of
that's
the
so
things,
terrible.
right?
Yeah.
But if you're being honest, a lot of churches, if you like kind of ask about the origin, they're like, "Oh, we're an offshoot from this church,"
Oh
and then you
man.
find out it's because they didn't agree with the pastor or whatever it may
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Um, but and with the story of Robert Thomas, because like it was a very unfortunate thing that happened to him, right? And
Yeah.
so I think there are people who might think, "Oh, so God made all these things happen by causing these bad things to happen, right?" Like I think that's like a possible way to think about it. But then there's the other side where it's no, maybe it's just God can redeem any situation and use it for His glory, right? So do you have a take on that? Like, is there a notion of maybe God did orchestrate this, like, for like, let's just take Robert Thomas's situation. God did orchestrate this really sad situation for him and his untimely death so that he can uh, bring, Christianity to Korea? Or did God just, use and redeem a really terrible situation?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, and I think I understood it. So
That's-
yeah, that's number one, because that's a complex question.
yeah, it is
Um,
it's a very complex question. Yeah.
so it's almost like does it take a bad thing to happen, like a bad thing like that, to have something great like the Korean church sprout?
Mhm.
Or could it have been played a different way, but God just used what happened anyway,
Right.
right? Kind of.
Right.
Um, I want to first like, yeah, it was a bad thing. I'll go with number one first of all. I
Hmm.
do think that that bad thing though, I want to take the label bad off of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was tragic for sure, but I think it's like people commonly say, the blood of the martyrs. The church grows from the
Hmm.
blood of the martyrs.
Hmm.
And that's literally what happened there. So from like a third person point of view, that's terrible. But I think for him, being as zealous as he was, and as much as he loved God, um, actually, you know what? I take that back. He would not have known
Hmm.
because everything that happened after was really like where all the works of God happened.
Yeah.
Think about it, his legacy, like how the like spoiler, I guess further, but like executioner came to Christ, the governor that charged his execution also came to Christ.
Hmm.
A young boy who witnessed it, all those people that were there on the riverbanks, they basically became the first like Christian community. So all that happened after his death. I do think it took something like that um, in order for the church to come out of it. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So
I think that
I
was a
mean,
seed. Yeah,
right. And it's
yeah,
just like, I mean, this is kind of I'm just really heady like this. I just like exploring these things. But
yeah.
um for yeah, like if I were to put myself in Robert Thomas's place, like my last thoughts as a missionary dying, about to be executed is
Yeah.
I failed my missionary,
I see.
like my
Yeah.
mission as a
Yeah.
missionary, right?
Hmm.
And so like yeah, it's I don't know. He, I guess, immediately once he was in heaven, saw the results of like the fruit
Yeah.
of his labor. So it
Mhm.
wasn't a long like time of him having to kind of mull in his
Guilt.
defeat,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, but in the moment, like I'm sure he felt like this is over. Like these people, once they kill me, I can't spread the good news to them, and so I just think as people, we do have this sort of um, burden of responsibility when we feel like we have a calling, right? But I don't know, like if the reason I asked the previous question of did God cause this bad thing to or this tragic thing to happen, or did God just redeem that situation, is because like that question, just that question itself, it kind of nullifies the efforts of the person, right? Because whatever the answer may be, because it's God having orchestrated everything, and so there's so many thoughts in my head, but there is this notion of um, like Robert Thomas as this great like awesome martyr, right? But and he himself as an individual did a great thing and he deserves praise. But does he actually? Because God actually orchestrated everything and God's the one who did everything. So like
Oh, okay.
so the
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the okay, so the just to clean it up, the real question, the real like genesis of this question is like how much of humanity is to be praised for this and how much of humanity is to be condemned also, because as a Korean, like the whole shame that I felt
Yeah.
of my ancestors of what they did, versus like this is all just kind of what God did and it just couldn't have happened any other way, or God was able to redeem that moment.
Oh, now that you break it down like that, wow. Okay. That is a tough question
Yeah.
because it's like the previous question, I would actually look at it at a different angle now that
Hmm.
you mention it like that.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, could God have meant it for it to be that way? Is the first question I have is
Right.
like,
Right.
or yeah,
Because
because it works both ways, if you think
right.
about it. Yeah.
Right. And this is probably something we're not going to have an answer to, but like if I also think about it another way is if Robert Frost's life didn't end that way, then maybe his kind of shouting of like believe in Jesus, maybe that wouldn't have been as impactful. So maybe God did
Mm.
require Robert Frost's life to end that day.
Oh, yeah,
You
yeah,
you
that's
know
true.
I'm not Robert Frost, Robert Thomas, sorry.
It's
I don't know why I said Robert
it's
Frost.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah. it's-
Mm.
I don't know why I started on this tangent and rabbit hole, but I guess this is kind of what I was thinking about as I was watching your channel. And
Oh,
so
okay.
now that I'm talking to you, I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, let me just
Very
bring.
philosophical. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Um,
Have you thought about these things at all, or?
I didn't put as much thought into that as I did into like the whole beauty of it all, you
Mhm.
know. But I can talk about that later. But to answer your question, you're like on the one hand, yeah, like if he hadn't died the way he did, if he hadn't encountered the executioner as he did,
Mhm.
pulling out that last Bible, handing it to the executioner, um, would they have become, believers at the same intensity that they did later on, becoming like the first Korean church leaders?
Mhm.
I don't know. So maybe it's almost like maybe it's like Jesus appearing to Thomas, you know. He came back for Thomas in a
Mhm.
way, to show him Thomas being the doubter,
Mhm.
had to show him see everything.
Mhm.
Maybe it's one of those things.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so maybe it was all orchestrated by God in
Yeah.
that sense.
Yeah.
Because um, I maybe my lack of imagination, but I can't see any other way that he would have done it, Robert Thomas. It's either he went there or he just decided not to. Maybe
Right.
he might go when he's a little older,
Mhm.
when the Korean government starts to open up a little bit. But yeah, yeah, yeah. This
Because
is good question. Good question. It's a
yeah,
really
yeah.
deep question.
Because the comfort that I get,
Um,
if God did mean for Robert Thomas's life to end that way,
Mhm.
then it like there is a comfort knowing that really whatever happens, it's been orchestrated by God. So like as if I were to place myself in Robert Thomas's shoes on that day in that boat, like approaching the riverbank, I think things I can think is, oh, they're shooting me down. They're shooting this boat down. They're sending like debris that's on fire to like try to
Yeah.
sink us. Um,
Mhm.
I think the first thing I can think is, if this is all in my hands, then I can't die here. I have to somehow survive. I have to jump out of the boat, swim away, or something. I have to survive to continue the mission. But if if I am comforted, but if I know and I'm comforted by the notion that everything happening has been orchestrated by God, then all I have to do is obey. So, like, I wonder if that was what he was thinking and saying, okay, you know what? This is the situation at hand. If I die, I die. If I perish, I perish. I'm going to continue to proclaim the gospel in this language that I know very little of, but I'm going to shout it to them. I'm going to throw Bibles at them and do anything I can in this situation. Like there, I think that's like a level of faith that I've never had to even think about having because I've never been persecuted in that way. I've never been in a situation where it was life and death.
Yeah.
But I wonder if that's what it looks like to have absolute obedience, even to just even to death, just to carry out the mission that God placed in your life.
I want to add on two things to what you said. It's
Yeah.
like, um, yeah, the mission, it's like the mission too, but it's like, um, I think he also thought like, and just this is kind of evidenced by the fact that he threw Bibles into the river,
Mm.
to prevent them from getting burned. Maybe he thought, maybe he knew that the river currents would take them somewhere, someone would see them.
Mhm.
Um, it's a big river, so maybe he thought that.
Mhm.
But then they could easily just sink to the bottom. No one
Yeah.
really gets to it. But I think he thought one thing was, and we don't know this, but I think we can safely say that he thought, that God will use everything.
Mm.
God will somehow bring this to fruition,
Mm.
which is kind of going back to that original question. That would fall more into the second option,
Right.
which was like, did God use a mishap and just change it for his glory?
Right.
So yeah, I think that's one like faith that he had. One aspect of his faith is that God will use this, even this somehow, some way.
Yeah.
And then second thing is like, why didn't he run away? I would have run
Mm.
away.
Right.
There's a lot of different islands, and he would have survived maybe 2 or 3 days,
Yeah.
in that wilderness. Why didn't he do that? More than the hopelessness that he saw in that, I think it was that he valued, um, the saving of souls more than his own
Mm.
life.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think
Wow.
those two things. Yeah, yeah,
And so, I mean, I think regardless of what the answer may be to the question, I think what we do know for a fact is it was it was a seemingly tragic situation that really was a springboard for what would become the nation that sends the second most
yeah,
missionaries out into the world. Like
yeah,
that's such a stark contrast, right? From a nation that is literally has outlawed Western influences and sought to kill those trying to bring Christianity into the nation,
yeah,
to the nation being on the other side now sending countless people out into the world to make disciples.
yeah.
And man, that's
It's true.
just those two things alone. Like when we look at those 2 points in history, like just the trajectory of that is something to, as Korean Americans, something we really can be proud of. Like in terms of our heritage, like what an amazing story, right?
Yeah, we're actually the first country to have Bibles translated in our own language before missionaries actually come.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's been like a model that missionaries have been trying to follow. If there's like a new tribe or a new area, they want to somehow get intel, get maybe a local, translate the Bibles into that language first and then go in. Because I think that was a game changer. One of the reasons why Korean church grew so rapidly was because there were Bibles and like,
Mm-hmm.
gospel content already in our language. Yeah.
Wow. And
Yeah.
that's really telling. That's of the power of the gospel, the power of God's word.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's yeah, because you talk about that in the video as well,
Mm,
about how yeah the Bible was already translated before people actually got onto the land and were able to do missionary work there. So,
mm.
yeah, thanks for indulging me in that. That was a really I
Yeah.
just yeah I have a lot of thoughts that just come to me that might be related to what I'm watching or not when I watch these type of videos. So
Uh,
yeah, no, thanks for indulging me in that. But so I wanted to ask you kind of about the future of your channel. Like, what are the plans that you have? So knowing that I haven't finished all the videos, I don't know if you've kind of you know of like until which time period you've done your videos on, but do you still have like many more years to go to get to the modern church, like modern like contemporary time,
uh,
or
there's actually a long way to go
okay?
before that. But there was a point that I wanted to reach.
Uh,
It's like the Great Pyongyang Revival. It's like a it's probably one of the like biggest scale revivals,
mm,
religious revivals that ever happened in world Christian history, and
mm,
I want to reach that.
mm,
Because there's so much, everything kind of is a domino effect that leads up to that.
mm,
But they would call that the birth, like the birth of the Korean church. That's when it was actually born.
mm.
And so, yeah, I want to reach that for sure.
Yeah, I'm excited for you to do that because I actually know almost nothing about the
Oh,
Pyongyang revival. Like I've
yeah.
heard it, I've heard people talk about it. I've heard like the older people at my church saying, "Oh, like we're
Oh,
gonna,"
yeah.
because like something that I've heard people say is, "Oh, we're gonna see a revival, like kind of like a revival that's similar to the Pyongyang revival." And like like I hear Pyongyang revival a lot, but all I
Yeah.
think is Pyongyang. You mean the city that's in North
Capital.
Korea? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, are you sure
Yeah.
you're talking about the same Pyongyang here? Like, so I know
Mm,
absolutely
yeah.
nothing about it. So I'm excited for you to get there. Yeah.
Mm.
So are you kind of in the process of making more videos to get to that place or?
I already have the scripts ready and everything. But
Mhm.
it's just a matter of trying to fit things in with all the craziness going on in life
Mm.
already.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you inspire me, man, because you have a wife, kids, well, kids coming up,
Yeah.
but then you also have a job, full-time job, and you managed to do this. So our conversation at your house when we met up, that was very, very good, where you said you don't really go on like a rigid schedule.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I might, try to follow that.
Yeah, yeah. Just kind of publish things as you can. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no pressure. It's just I think though one thing is like the content you're producing is really valuable because there's really nothing else like it
Yeah.
that I know of,
Mhm.
and yeah, like it's just in the story of Robert Thomas, it's like really like just the tip of the spear, right? Like
Yeah.
Robert Thomas's story is really like you don't really see like things happening all that much. You just kind of see the seeds being planted. But even in that, there's just so much to think about, so much to talk about. So like yeah, just everything else, I think yeah, it'd be really great for people in our generation to learn about. I don't even know honestly if my parents know much about the church history because my parents
Probably not.
became
Mm.
yeah, my parents became Christian like after they moved to America. So
Oh, okay.
and I doubt, like you were saying, I doubt this is like church history. I don't think that's something that's taught in school, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, my parents might not even know. So, yeah, I think you're doing really amazing work, Josh. I think you should continue. And I'm gonna give you gentle nudges every now and again. Say, hey, like, are you working on your video? Like, because
Yeah.
one thing we talked about when you were over is like you're doing like videography stuff at work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so
So that's
like that's a skill that can be very easily transmitted to the work that you're doing for Kyokajan. And yeah, it's already really like it's like really high quality stuff. Like the transitions that you have and like
oh. Yeah.
like the map of Korea and like the effect that
Oh,
you have
yeah.
over it. I think that's really
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Appreciate it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, yeah, like any way that I can support you or our listeners can support you, please let us know because this is something that, yeah, for sure, I think many people would be interested in. If not anyone else, at least I for sure am interested, and I want to see more. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So,
Um,
and before we wrap up, yeah, do you have any last thoughts or anything you
um,
wanted to add that we didn't get to cover?
I think I got a majority of what I wanted to say out there
Yeah.
today, which
Yeah.
I do appreciate. This is a good platform for that. But yeah, I just want to encourage people to, even if it's not through my channel, to
Mhm.
really um, not give up on the Korean church.
Mhm.
If you're Korean Americans, even if you're not Korean, that's fine too. But Jesus didn't give up on his church. Church
Mhm.
is his bride. He's not going to
Mhm.
give up on it, and I don't think we should either. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
if knowing how church was before we were even born, helps you to have a new appreciation and love for the Korean church, as flawed as it can be. I would encourage you to dive into it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think
Oh,
there is something really special about heritage. I mean, even in the Bible, we talk about like kind of generational gifts of faith. Like Timothy, Paul talks about
oh yeah,
Timothy and how like his grandma, I believe grandmother, like he talks about her faith being like
yeah,
passed down to Timothy. So there
mhm,
is something definitely to be said about our forefathers and things that they've done. And yeah, like the unique position that Korean Americans are in is we don't even know like general Korean history that well.
yeah,
So I mean,
yeah,
right? Because yeah, even with like I had to really dig because I didn't learn it at school in school. Like I only learned
yeah,
about
yeah,
American history, so I don't really know. I really honestly growing up, all I knew is Korea was occupied by Japan. That's why like a lot of older
yeah.
Koreans don't like Japanese
They hate
people.
Japanese.
Right,
Yeah,
right. And then,
yeah, yeah.
there was the split between the 30th parallel. Like
Oh,
those are like really the only things I knew. Like I've had to really dig to further understand. And I'm not even really that deep into that journey. But yeah, to learn about the church history, I think that's just like another layer, another fascinating a story thread that I want to continue. So, yeah, Josh, thank you so much for being on today. And just to give people a little teaser, Josh talked about clinging and really giving the second chance to the Korean American Church. There is going to be I'm hoping for it to be kind of actually, it's going to be a multi-guest video where we talk about a topic, and the topic is going to be around diversity in the church. And so I'm actually intentionally getting people with different perspectives on that. And I think that's going to be a fascinating conversation. So Josh is going to obviously going to be the perspective from why the unique uh, identity of Korean American church is important. So we'll get to that when we get to that. It's just been difficult kind of coordinating that with all like everyone's different schedules and all that. But yeah, just a little teaser. Shout out to Stephen Liu. He's a student at UGA who actually posed the question to me, and we got to record that. You saw the video, right? I sent you that video.
I did.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So we're gonna be kind of using that video as a jumping off, like questioning of this like diversity in the Korean American church, and we'll get a lot of different a lot of different perspectives on that. Don't hold me to this, guys. Don't because like if at the very least we'll get Josh's take on it, but if the scheduling doesn't work out and I'm not able to come through with everything I'm trying to do with it, please forgive me. But I'm just throwing it out there just to keep myself accountable so that I pursue that and try to get that done. So, once again, Josh, thank you so much for being on today. And yeah,
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to watching the rest of your videos. And once I finish them all, I'm gonna message you and say, hey, it's time
Okay.
for you to release more videos.
The next one.
Yeah,
Yeah. You're
yeah.
almost there.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, so yeah, I just want to remind people Josh's channel, it's Hyokhaja. Is you have to type it out in Korean to get a hit on
Uh,
YouTube, right?
I'm gonna have to work on that because
Okay.
it's gonna be a diverse crowd for sure.
Yeah.
So,
So, do you have like a Instagram or anything dedicated to your channel?
oh no, not yet.
Okay. Because I was
Yeah.
gonna suggest if you do, then
Mhm.
you can just link your video profile
Oh,
to the
yeah.
Instagram, so you can just point people to your Instagram to get to the video.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if you do that, if you get to do that, whenever you do that, I'll link it up on my Instagram as well so people can see. But for now, I'll throw out exactly what they have to type in to find your videos
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
people can get to it. Yeah. So
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
yeah, thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next time.